Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I want to thank everyone that views my videos, that listen to what I say on my channel. A shout out to the chat. Shout out to the chat. Arabia Barbosa 914, which is the county New York. Morning, YouTube. Good morning. And this is me doing another live video. I want to talk about my experience being an inmate in the South Carolina Department of Corrections. I was arrested and convicted of common law robbery back in 1994. I was 21 years old. I went in front of Judge Schuler, September 1995. I was given a prison sentence of 8 years. I did 6 years and 7 months. Now, everyone knows that when you do time in South Carolina, especially being a female, the receiving center for the inmates is right there at the Women's Center in Columbia, South Carolina, right there on Broad River Road. Now, this happened years and years ago. I was 22 when I first went in the prison system. I was released in 2001. October the 1st, 2001. I did 6 years, 7 months. And during my time, I did most of my time at Leith Correctional Institute, which is located in Greenwood, South Carolina. But because I was such a troublemaker, I was a troubled inmate, I was suffering from mental illness that was not being treated right away, I ended up being shipped back to the Women's Center. I did a couple of months there. During my time there, I met Susan Smith. I lived on Cottage 6. Susan Smith was housed on Cottage 4. Cottage 6, Cottage 4, Cottage 2 are the main three buildings where they housed inmates that had behavior problems and mental health issues. Shout out to the chat. I met Susan Smith the first time in 1995. She was a loudmouth motherfucker. When I saw her again, it had to been 2000, just before I maxed out my sentence. I went back to the Women's Center in 2000. I maxed out in 2001. And when I met her again, Susan Smith was smaller in size and very, very quiet. She was very sneaky, very manipulative, always looking for a way to come up. She was coming up all right because homegirl ended up getting on the computer, making a website right along with other inmates. She got male persons to be her pen pals. And these men took care of Susan Smith. They wrote her letters. They sent her money. Oh, yes, they looked out for her. While I was there at the Women's Center, Susan Smith was carrying on sexual relationships, not only with some inmates that were housed at the Women's Center, but she also had a sexual relationship with a correctional officer. He was a sergeant, and she was seeing Captain Rowe. And the only reason why I found out about this is because there was one particular night the yard did not close. The yard was opened for recreation time. Everyone came out onto the compound to spend time with their friends, their girlfriends, to play cards, to drink their sodas, to eat food cooked in the microwave. Oh yes, we was having a ball that night. And I was sitting with my girlfriend, Marisol. And I said, Marisol, I thought the yard usually closes around a certain time before it gets too dark. She said, Ray, just sit back and enjoy the ride. Susan Smith is doing her job with Captain Rowe. Yo, I'm going to tell y'all, they did not close that yard until much later that evening. A shout out to the chat. A couple of months later, it was found out that she was being busted for having sexual relations with a staff member. So what they did, they took Susan Smith off the compound, they green-bagged her belongings, and they put her on the lockup unit at the Women's Center for 6 months. During that 6-month period, the authorities conducted an investigation of staff members sleeping with inmates, having sexual relations with the inmates there at the Women's Center. Not only at the Women's Center, but they was also investigating what was going on at Leith Correctional. After Susan Smith did her time on the lockup unit, they shipped her to Leith Correctional. That's where she's at right now. And I saw a report not too long ago where people are concerned about whether or not she will end up being granted parole. She's a violent offender. She's serving 2 life sentences for killing her children, drowning them in a lake in Union, South Carolina. She committed that crime in 1994. She's still there as an inmate. She's still there at Leith Correctional. And don't ask me how she was able to carry on a relationship with any kind of staff member. She was very infamous. Everyone knew who she was. No one really dealt with her. No one really socialized with her on the compound like that. The other inmates did not really associate with her unless they wanted money to be sent to their Cooper account. There was plenty of women in there that looked to Susan Smith to put money on their books. And usually she would do that when certain inmates would request money from her. They would write kites. They would send these kites to her while she was on Cottage 4, and they would ask for financial favors. And usually she fulfilled those financial requests, especially after certain things were done for her arts and crafts projects. Because Susan Smith crocheted a lot, she knitted a lot, and she did a lot of needlepoint, cross stitching. And she would get the other women from different buildings to assist her completing those tasks. The public is very concerned about her going up for parole. She's a lifer. There is a possibility she may never make parole. There is a possibility that she will end up dying in prison. But I have seen quite a few times that women that have life sentences usually are granted parole after 20 years, sometimes 20, 22, 25 years after they completed a certain amount of time on their sentence. So there is a possibility that Susan Smith might make parole. I've heard some people that's in authority express concern about this. I have listened to the news reports. It's really up to the parole board whether she makes it or not. But I'm saying to you that she has a large following out here in the free world. There's lots of men that are very interested in Susan Smith. Trust me. They write her, they put money on her books, they take very good care of Susan Smith. And I believe that some of these men might end up contacting the parole board themselves. They're going to end up contacting them because people are going to write letters to these people. They're going to push for her to get out. If she doesn't get out this year, there will be a possibility she might make parole at a later date. Shout out to the chat. Parole hearings are held for nonviolent offenders and violent offenders. Everyone gets their chance at parole. Those that are usually, when they're sentenced, they usually be like, okay, the judge will be like, okay, you're gonna get a certain amount of time and you'll be eligible for parole at whatever time that you do a completion of your sentence. So there is a possibility. I've seen plenty of people get out of the penitentiary. I've seen plenty of women that were convicted of murder, straight up murder, and I've seen them all make parole. If they don't make parole the first time, they usually make it the second time they appear before the parole board. But a person like me, back in them days, I was in there for 8 years. I wanted for parole every year, never made parole, was never granted parole. I ended up maxing out my sentence, but I wasn't there for murder neither. I was there on a robbery charge, a common law robbery charge. Shout out to the chat. I'm out of here. Everyone have an awesome day. Have an awesome day. I'm still at the job waiting. for my ride so I can go home. The other day, my homegirl just celebrated her birthday. She's a Scorpion. So I'm looking to hit her up this morning and bless her with a little something, something. And then I'm going to go home and enjoy the rest of my weekend. A shout out to the chat. Peace out, y'all. One.